After you have the center back seam pinned, our next step is to sew it together. And remember, we're doing a double stitch seam that is at 5/8 of an inch. We're going to do it at 1/2 inch, and then we will come back and zigzag to keep the edges from fraying. So the first thing that we're going to do is check the stitching on our machine. Remember to, if you've got threads in the back, hold on to them just to make sure that they don't get sucked down into the bottom. Okay, and mine looks pretty good on both sides, so I'm going to just set that aside and get started. Whenever you are sewing something that has a curve in it, whenever possible, start at the curve and work into the straight. It's a whole lot easier to do it that way than to start at a straight edge and try to wiggle into a curve. Sometimes you got a curve in the middle, and so you have to go straight, curve, straight. But in this one, it's easier if we start at the inner leg seam rather than at the top of our shorts. That's why we pinned it to look like a J. So I am moving in about 1/4 of an inch from the edge. I have my raw edge of my seam set up next to my blue tape, which is 5/8 of an inch. I'm getting rid of my pin. I'm going to drop my needle down, and before I start sewing, I'm going to hold on to my threads. And because I'm going around a curve, I'm going to go slow. I don't want to mess this up and have to redo it, and I don't want to have a big jig jog in it like that. All right, so I did a couple of stitches forward. Now I'm going to back stitch to the end, and make sure you back stitch all the way to the end, because when you put the legs together, if you haven't back stitched to the end, you're going to have a little gap in the seam. Alrighty, so I'm going to hold on to the threads just for a few to get started, and go slow around the curve. All right, I'm going to stop and take out my pins. I want to rearrange this. I want to keep this part right here flat. If you notice it's starting to bubble up there a little bit, that's okay because I already passed that stitching. But I want to keep this part in front of me flat all the time. Okay? Okay, now I need to stop and shift it a little bit because I'm coming on that curve. And if you notice, I didn't pick it up and move it over. My needle is down, and what I did is I slightly raised the presser foot just so I could realign that. And that's okay to do. You can always, because the needle's not going anywhere. All right, the needle is down, it's staying where it's supposed to go, and so I'm not going to have a big bump in my stitch. All right, I'm coming up to another pin, and my curve is actually not quite as deep right now, so it's getting a little bit easier to do. And I think once I hit this last pin here, I'm going to be on the straight. Okay, and so I'm going to finish going straight to the top. The hard part was going around the curve. I'm going to go straight to the top, and then we'll meet back up when I get to the end. Okay, I'm almost to the top, and what I'm going to do now is take that last pin out. I'm going to keep my fingers on top of the fabric so it doesn't shift around, and I'm going to stitch all the way to the end, to the very top of the fabric, and then I'm going to back stitch about 4 or 5 stitches. Okay? Oh, you notice I speeded up when I was off camera. All right, back stitch about 4 or 5 stitches, stitch off the end, and then we're going to do needle up, presser foot up, pull off, and make sure you cut those threads. If you look at your grade sheet, there is a notation every single seam that I check to see if your threads are clipped, and if they aren't, you actually lose points on your project, so make sure you cut those nice and close. All right, so the straight part's not too difficult to do. Most of you can do a straight seam. It's harder to do it down here where we have this curve. So if we start down here at the bottom, we want to make sure that this is a nice 5/8 of an inch around here. This is really important. If you don't have a nice curve around here and you have it consistently 5/8 of an inch, then your shorts are not going to fit the way they're supposed to, and also you're going to have a funky looking seam. So it needs to be a nice straight curve around there. Our next step is to do our second line of stitching.